Oh, Suzanne, if only I could just require one word, I'd be the next Zendaya or Madonna. No, Pope Leo is 2 words, never mind. Hey, everyone. I'm Mira Solani. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm home. Thanks for having me home. Forefront birthed me, pretty much, and it's good to be back. There's a lot of y'all that I don't know, a lot of new faces, a lot of old faces here. But hopefully after this sermon, you'll know a little bit more about me. Today, I think the liturgy did a lot of work for us. I know we're holding a lot of complexity today in a whole range of emotions, joy, grief, complexity, about expectations and hopes and dreams for what we wanted this day to be, tied to motherhood, as mothers to be, for those longing to be mothers, for those who have mothered and lost, and for those who have mothered and aren't acknowledged for that. But I want to say that much of the source of that comes from dominant ideology that has defined and confined motherhood to a role that benefits those in power. And this dominant ideology, driven by patriarchy, empire ideology, by heteronormativity, capitalism, dictates who can be a mother and who can't, and disposes women who don't fit the status quo. I call BS. This morning, I want to invite us all today to look at motherhood, to look at today as a celebration of mothering, as a spiritual calling to nurture, to cultivate, to persevere, to preserve, and to protect life. That is the role of mothering. So we can honor and protect life. We can honor mothers, biological, chosen, ancestral, and present. And we can expand our mothering and honoring of those who mother to all who mother. And that includes who's a teacher in this room. If you've ever volunteered at Kid Stuff, you're a teacher. It involves activists, honoring activists. I know there are a lot of activists in this space. Our neighbors, aunties, and elders who carry the fierce and tender labor of nurturing life in a world that often resists it. We name this not sentimentally, but because it is spiritual and political. To mother is to engage in the sacred work of growing life. And that includes the sacred work of preserving life where it has been threatened. To be a mothering people, a mothering church, is to say yes to God's call to make all things new. So can you try that with me this morning? Let's try to reimagine this day. Let's pray. Oh God, who births galaxies and gardens, who mothers justice into existence, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be pleasing to you, our God, our Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Amen. This morning's text is from Revelations. Yeah, indeed. I wonder why it feels a little heavy today. When the book of Revelations was written, it was written during a time when early Christians were living under the shadow of Roman imperial power and the collapse of the Jewish temple in 70 CE during the reign of Emperor Domitian, a ruler who demanded absolute loyalty from his constituents. He forced allegiance to anyone who didn't comply. They suffered persecution. He silenced dissent and insisted on being worshipped as a god. And Christ followers who refused to participate in this form of imperial cult worship were viewed with suspicion. sometimes facing economic penalties and complete exile. The Roman Empire would claim that this was a period of peace and would attribute that peace to their governance. But the reality was that people were living in fear. They were afraid of defying Rome. It was a time marked by fear, by political violence, and persecution, especially for those who dared to live by a different vision of truth, justice, and community. Revelation 21:5 says, "And the one who was seated on the throne said, 'See, I am making all things new.'" And this wasn't just some distant promise for heaven to come, but it was a radical declaration of hope, spoken to a people living under empire. Today, not much has changed. Today, we're living under a different kind of empire, but one that still exalts wealth, suppresses voices of dissent, and threatens the lives of the marginalized, under leaders who, like Domitian, often seek power through spectacle and division. Yeah, I see some nodding heads. We live under leaders who position themselves as saviors. Sound familiar? Who have followers that refer to them using messianic terms, saying that they're chosen by God. I know you're thinking of more than one name in your head right now. I know I am. Like Domitian, we live under leaders who challenge dissenting voices, particularly those who are vocal about the threats to our democratic freedoms. We live under leaders who attack free speech, free press, and who label opponents as traitors to America. Like Domitian's reinforcing of Roman imperialism and religious nationalism, we live under leaders who champion Christian nationalism, aligning with white evangelical support to promote a vision of cultural and religious dominance, viewing non-citizens, non-whites, and non-Christians as a threat to national security and a threat to the American identity. The author declares, "See, I am making all things new." These words were spoken to communities crushed under violence and persecution of empire. This vision of God's new creation wasn't toxic positivity or escapist. It was a call to persevere. It was a call for the community to continue resisting, living with different values, living now as if the new world were already unfolding. The author was calling attention to the ways in which they were practicing communal care and encouraging them to keep doing so, to resist the entire empire's attempts to pit them against one another, to make them enemies of one another, to resist the empire's attempts to scare them into individualistic, self-preservational thinking at the expense of others, particularly the most vulnerable. So these words are spoken to a community to invite them to resist and to continue co-creating new futures with God, even when it looked incredibly bleak out there. And so I ask you, beloveds, sitting right here, isn't that the task of motherhood? To believe that new life is possible even when nothing around you says that it is? So for those of you that don't know me, my mother's side of the family comes from Bicol, a province in the Philippines. I come from a long line of rice farmers. My Lola, my grandmother, she raised 6 children on her own, and she would harvest rice and sell it at the market to provide for her children. But it wasn't enough. So at the age of 13, my mother left school to help her. She began harvesting and selling fruit. That's not my mother, that's me, but that was the only picture I could find. That's me climbing a tree in my mother's village. I think that's a papaya that I picked, and my kids walking through her village, and this is children still today selling fruit at the market, trading their childhood, play, and their education for their family's survival. That's what my mother did. And life didn't get easier for her because large corporations arrived, and they came with heavy machinery and paid farmers very little to operate this machinery. They started using chemicals on our soil and sprayed toxins all over the land. They extracted as much as they could from the land and stripped the land for profit. They flattened the rhythm of the earth that my mother and her ancestors had so carefully listened to. And the climate shifted. Droughts grew stronger, typhoons more violent, and the land could no longer provide as it once could. So my mother did what many other mothers did. She left. She traveled to Manila to work at a clothing factory, sending money home so that her siblings could eat and could go to school. And it was an act of sacrifice, something that's really common in the Filipino community. And her mothering then, she was not a mother at this point, extended beyond boundaries and borders. But in leaving, her connection between her family and the land began to fray. And what had once been a living relationship, intimate and reciprocal with her community and the land, was now disrupted, not by choice, but by necessity, by a need to survive. And this rupture, this migration from land, culture, and ancestral ways isn't a story that's just unique to my mother's experience. It's shared by millions and billions of people across the globe. My mother's journey is a story of disconnection, but it's also a story of resilience. She insisted on surviving, and she insisted on life, even when exploitative structures put profit over people and threatened to beat her into compliance. Her journey is a story of reclaiming wisdom from the earth, wisdom from her community. Her story is a story where she poured out into people and started tending and birthing in a new place when she was disconnected from family, from home, and everything that she'd ever known. You see, long after she left the rice fields of the Philippines, long after industrial farming and climate change had uprooted her family's way of life, she began to plant again. This time in Hong Kong, where I was born, amidst a concrete jungle. She planted small things, tomatoes, chilies, herbs, not much, but enough to share, and that's what she did. She made meals from the harvest, simple, familiar meals that reminded her of home. And she invited others in, fellow migrant workers from the Philippines who also had to leave home. Many who had to leave their families and work in garment factories, in other people's homes as domestic helpers, worked in restaurants and in nursing homes. And they'd gather together, they'd cook together and share stories. They grieved what they lost, but nourished what they found in one another and what they were building new. So this wasn't just a rooftop garden anymore. It was a table where all were invited. And from here, she formed her community, a community away from her homeland, a community formed not from abundance. She didn't have a lot to share, but from intention. A community formed not from wealth, but from care. And so she birthed a radical and new way of being in her new surroundings. She cultivated and nourished those connections and others who had similar experiences, sharing the wisdom and care that had been passed down from her ancestors with each new migrant worker that was coming into Hong Kong, that was struggling with this transition of trying to survive in a foreign land. She shared what she knew so that they could feel at home. Where they were experiencing dehumanization and marginalization in Hong Kong as ethnic minorities, she created space where they could have joy, where they could laugh again. And they sang a lot of karaoke. Through her, I learned that mothering isn't just about raising children. It's about raising life, resisting destruction. It's about reclaiming what empire tries to erase, which is our connections with one another. And it is through this lens that we can hear Revelations 21:5, to participate in making all things new. And she did that with her hands, in collaboration with the divine. So God in Revelation didn't become some distant being or a distant promise. God, through her, showed her that she can birth new creation. And God is inviting us all into that process, to reclaim mothering as not just a biological function, but as a sacred, justice-centered calling. What does it mean for us as a community of faith to mother new futures, particularly those where all sorts of people, all sorts of powers at work in the world are threatening to snuff us out? Because it's pretty bleak out there. There are laws preventing life-saving, gender-affirming healthcare. And we have a leader that indiscriminately disappears migrants and sends them to concentration camps. We have a leader that is deporting green card holders for speaking out against genocide. What does it mean to reclaim mothering, the spirit of mothering, when we see that there are people in our city who have to choose between paying rent and paying their utility bills or grocery bills? What does it mean to reclaim the spirit of mothering when we are living day to day in a climate crisis that our leaders are saying is fake news? It means we have to insist on living differently. And honestly, Forefront's where I learned that. We have to insist on preserving life right now. And I feel a need to say that and call attention to migrants and immigrants and trans folks right now, because we are facing massive threats to their rights, to their basic human rights. We must sustain creation in the face of climate destruction, where our atmosphere continues to be polluted by the burning of fossil fuels that impacts our health, everyone in this room, but more particularly, the vulnerable, poor, and low-income population. Brown, Black, and Indigenous communities have become dumping grounds for these massive corporations. It means we have to insist on birthing new ways of living together that are rooted in collective equity, collective liberation, collective dignity. And this isn't a passive waiting. Oh, mothers don't sit around and wait. This is an active mothering. Labor pains. Oof, I remember those labor pains. It is what God calls the church to be, a midwife to justice, a womb for collective imagination. Can you place your hands on your stomach? Right here is birthing collective imagination, a tender and yet tenacious protector of all who are vulnerable. That's you. So, beloveds, I know we love to ask questions at this church. What if, as well as asking the question, what is it that we believe, we also ask ourselves, what are we birthing? And let me tell you, a good lot of you are probably mothering in so many ways. I know, because like I said, this church birthed me. If you've ever created safe and affirming and inclusive space for marginalized communities, you're mothering. If you've ever accompanied someone through grief or transition, you're mothering. If you've offered warmth and dignity to those who've experienced housing insecurity or food insecurity, you are mothering. Who's planted produce? Because I know one of the first things I did here in this community was go to a community garden and plant, and I've never picked up a shovel or a hoe before, but whew. Robbie Kleinberg was the one who proudly showed me his box of tomatoes. So come on, tell me there's someone has to plant. And yes, yeah, you're mothering. Who's made a meal for someone? That meal train, it's still going. You're mothering. Have you provided mentorship, Jonathan? Especially to those who are navigating injustice, affirming their worth and their potential like you did me. You were mothering. Yeah, you helped birth me. I know it's a weird thought, but just sit with the discomfort of it. You'll be all right, bro. Have you advocated for people whose voices that society has silenced and marginalized? Juby, I know you are doing that work now. Have you advocated to protect the earth? I know this community has a climate justice group, right? Protested against the detention and deportation of people, spoken out against state violence, and cutting access to health care that disproportionately affects Black and brown folks. You are all mothering. And so I ask you, beloved, I know you're at this place where you're raising money again. I swear this community is like a perpetual cycle of raising money. Can you keep going? Because it's getting pretty bad out there, right? Can we all agree on that? And we can't leave each other hanging. We need you to continue to make things new by being willing to do the new and unfamiliar and uncomfortable, scary thing. Because when you're willing to, something sacred might rise. Yeah. Oh, that's a quiet clap. Come on. Forefront has always been at the forefront of birthing something new since its inception. Even before we really knew each other, at the very first service here, this church made a commitment to my daughter at her baby dedication. Some of you, maybe two of you, remember that. But it happened, there are photos. We talked about racism. We talked about affirming LGBTQIA+ folks. And some people broke up with us. Forever. But others came to find love and belonging here. We went through pain and heartache. Some of that pain is still there. It feels a little tender. It's a bit sore. And I feel like we were always only 3 months away from closing down as a church. Do you remember fighting over whether or not we could afford to have bagels? But we stuck it out. We believed that we had to resist the death of our community because we were doing something new here, something different. And we were doing it together, co-laboring together with God. In those moments before, It feels like right now, those moments before always feel impossible. Right, Jonathan? Yeah, Juby. It always felt impossible. Even felt like you could taste death. About 5 minutes before I had my first biological daughter, Maya, I went to a pretty dark place. I didn't think I was gonna make it. I was literally like, okay, they're just gonna have to cut me open, and it's okay. Maya has people. But I was in so much pain. I really didn't think I was gonna make it. But my doula, Maggie Torrance, whom some of you know, rubbed my back. She stroked my hair. And she told me, I am so proud of you. You are so brave. Mind you, Maggie had seen many, many, many births, but had never lived through that experience herself, but somehow knew the exact words I needed to hear from someone to show me nurturing and mothering and loving care. And she was there to catch Maya's head while the doctor just like, ooh, there's a baby. Just casually. It's a true story. And she's been there since then. She was the first person to see the top of Maya's head. She was the first person to see Misha, my youngest daughter. She reminded me that I was gonna make it through every time I thought I could taste death. When I would look out the window at night, breastfeeding my child, any one of them that needed to be breastfed in that moment at 2, 3 in the morning, I thought, if I just jump. She reminded me, you're gonna get through this. She reminded me that I could get through raising 2 babies under 2, that I could get through those sleepless nights. She reminded me that I could make it while I was juggling a part-time job and raising kids at the same time. She reminded me that I was gonna make it when I had to leave this community that birthed me and made me who I am. She reminded me, we're always gonna be here. We're always gonna be your family. You're gonna make it. She reminded me that I was gonna make it when seminary was kicking my butt, when every job after it was gonna kick my butt. She reminded me. And even today, she still acts as my doula, continuing to stand beside me, to birth new and liberative futures with me, for me, to live freer, more boldly, more expansively, for a future for me and my daughters. Y'all, God is making all things new. But God doesn't do it alone. We are all called to doula for that future. And there are doulas and mothers all over this room. The ones that you least expect, Zion, all over this room. So this Mother's Day, let us honor the spirit of mothering by embodying resilience, and cultivating creation and those connections with one another. Let us be reminded that God's renewal doesn't come through domination. Domination, people in power don't get to have the last word, because the spirit of mothering through love protects and nurtures all. Protects and nurtures life. Domination leads to death, but the spirit of mothering leads to life. And mothering is not limited to a biology or gender. It is a sacred and courageous work of creating new life in a world that threatens to destroy everything. God invites us to join in that resurrection of new life, and it's not a past event, it's a present calling, and it's in this room right now. It's a future we must choose to mother into being. To mother is to partner with God in making all things new. Can you do that, church? I'm gonna call the musicians to come up. We're gonna take communion together. And I I've mentioned before, this community birthed me, and it's why you all hold such a tender place for me in my heart. And I joke about the times when we talk about being 3 months away from closing, but we made it every single time. I don't know where y'all are at right now. To me, y'all are thriving. From afar, you're doing brave and bold things. I'm in spaces where people are like, how do we get young people in the church? And I'm like, there's this church called Forefront Brooklyn. You ever been there? I was about to say something super ageist. I'm not going to say it. Yeah, I'm not going to say it because this is being recorded. Oh, it's a funny thing, too. God help me. God, just help me. Okay, back to the program. We are doing bold things, not saying bad jokes. We are doing bold and courageous things at this church. So when you come up to the table and collect communion, remembering that when my mother had to start a new life, she took what she had and gave but a little, and it was a meal. So when you come up to receive communion, we can play some nice, emotive music so I don't cry. When you come up and you take communion, remember this communion is also not a whole lot. It's the tiniest little piece of wafer, and my God, the smallest drop of juice. But it's symbolic that we are family, that we belong to each other, that we don't dominate one another, that the person you're sitting next to is someone that you've committed to preserving their life. That when you step out these doors, you're taught in this space that the love that you feel here, the belonging that you feel here, doesn't have to be confined to this space, but moves across borders. What you experience here can be experienced all over this city, all over this nation. My God, we need it in this nation, all over this world. So when you come up, it may just be a small wafer, but it's a powerful representation of what Jesus sacrificed to show us that a new way was possible, but only with you. When you come to the table to share in this, we need everyone's participation. We need everyone to show up at the cookout, okay? To share stories, to grieve and laugh. Because we're going to make it through this. And the next time, there's going to be twice as many of us fighting about whether or not we can afford bagels. Because that's just church. There'll be twice as many of us fighting to keep us alive. Because empire just does that, just like its little head comes up every so often. Don't mind that. So will you come and eat with me? Hold on to your communion cup and wafer until you sit back down. And maybe as you come to receive, you can think about, what are you birthing? What is God calling you to birth?